My name is Eleanor Hart, and this is my voice. I was born in America, and I have lived most of my life in its long streets and tall buildings. Long ago, my husband, Jack, and I owned a quiet ranch outside Denver, Colorado. We had a small white house with a wide porch and a tin roof that sang when it rained. We kept 2 horses and a windmill that clicked through the night like a careful clock. But work and school pulled us into the city. We boxed our few things and drove east to Chicago, telling ourselves it would be 1 year. The city took us in and did not let go. 1 year became many, and the ranch fell into the far corners of my days. I did not go back for 47 years. Jack went alone, 7 times each year, steady as a season. He would pack a small bag, kiss my cheek, and say, "Just checking on the place, Elle." He came home with dust on his boots and a softer face, as if the wind had brushed the worry off him. I stayed with the children, Anna and Paul, and kept the city rhythm, alarms and lunchboxes and late trains. On our wall hung one photo of the porch steps and the open field. It looked like a door you could still walk through, even from far away. Time moved and changed us. Jack's hair turned the gray of river stones, and mine thinned to a light halo in the bathroom mirror. We spoke sometimes of Europe because my grandmother had once crossed the ocean with a lace handkerchief and a stubborn hope, but our feet stayed in America. Jack always kept the ranch key on a plain ring. He paid taxes from his checking account, wrote down small costs in a neat hand, $1.78 for fence posts, $29 for a kettle, $16 for paint. He never asked me to come with him. He only said, "It's holding, Elle," and I believed him because I wanted to and because he sounded sure. When Jack passed away one quiet spring, the city felt too full and too empty at once. Friends brought casseroles and soft words. A week later, Anna and Paul stood in my kitchen with red eyes and practical minds.
Paul said, "Mom, sell the ranch."
"It's worth nothing now." Anna touched my arm and added, "It's a lot to manage. You shouldn't have to worry." The word nothing landed hard. I nodded like a polite guest inside my own life. But that night I stared at the old photo of the porch and felt a tug, small but strong, like a thread still tied to me from far away. I decided to visit before I signed anything. I told no one but the children, who agreed to wait. I bought a one-way ticket to Denver for $312 and rented a car at the airport for $44 a day. The clerk asked if I wanted a GPS, and I said yes, but my hands already remembered the turns. I drove west until the glass towers fell behind me and the fields opened. The light grew wider. A hawk drew a line across the sky as if to underline my choice. I spoke to Jack the way I used to speak to him on long drives, as if he sat in the seat beside me. "I'm coming home. Just to look," I said. The wind pressed against the car like a reply. At last the road turned to gravel, and then to 2 pale tracks through grass. I parked where we always parked. Ahead stood the old metal gate, rusted to a warm brown. I put my palm on it and felt the rough chill of the past and the now. When I pushed, the hinges cried out in the same rusty voice I remembered. Beyond it, the house stood waiting, paint peeled, roof sound, porch a little sagged but proud. I stepped through the gate and onto the land I had not touched for 47 years, my heart full and simple. I did not yet know what was living there. I only knew I was finally ready to see. I walked up the path with slow steps, my hand skimming the tall grass like I was reading the land by touch. The house rose ahead of me, the same small white shape I knew from the photo, only real now and full of weather. The porch sagged a little at the left corner, and the rail had a new plank that did not match the old paint. That made me smile. Someone had cared enough to mend it, even if the color was wrong. The front door still wore the dent from the day Jack swung it wide, and it hit the iron hook. I felt that dent with my thumb, and the years between then and now loosened a bit, like a tight knot starting to give. The door was not locked. That fact should have made me tense, but it did not. I knew the sound the hinges would make before they made it. Inside, the air was cool and clean, not the dust smell I had braced for. Sun fell in a long stripe across the pine floor. Our old table stood where we left it, but the top was scrubbed to a soft glow. A blue enamel kettle sat on the stove, and a thin line of steam curled from its spout. I froze, listening. In the quiet, I heard two far sounds, the windmill clicking like a careful metronome, and a soft voice, maybe a child, not words but the shape of them. On the counter lay a tin box with a sliding lid, the kind Jack liked. I opened it and found a folded note in his hand. The date was last winter. L, it said, if you come, the house is not empty. Please be kind. J. The letters were neat and steady, the same way he used to write $78 for fence posts and $29 for kettles and laugh at himself for the tiny lines he drew under each number. My eyes filled. I set the note back as if it could bruise. A shadow fell across the doorway. I turned and saw a woman standing there with a little boy at her side. She was younger than Anna, maybe early 30s, with brown hair in a braid and a face that had the look of a person who meets hard days and keeps going. The boy held a wooden truck and studied me with that clear, frank stare children have. Hello, the woman said. I'm Grace, and this is Leo. Are you Eleanor? My name in her mouth made the room tilt. Yes, I said. I am. The boy rolled the truck, once on the rug. Wheels clicking. From outside came a man's voice, warm, low, calling to a dog. The dog answered with a happy bark. Grace stepped in, not bold, just steady. Jack said you might come, she said. He told us to keep the place neat and safe. He told us the house was meant to be lived in. We moved to the porch together. The man came around the barn then, wiping his hands on a rag. He wore a plain shirt and work jeans, the kind that take to dust and sun. This is Ben, Grace said. He fixes everything. Ben lifted a hand in greeting and leaned the rag over his shoulder. His dog, a lean black and white thing, sat at his boot heel and wagged like a flag. Ma'am, he said, and the word held respect without weight. I gave him my name. We sat on the steps. The wind brushed past and smelled like warm hay. Grace told me their story in simple pieces that fit together. She had lived in Denver and then in Chicago for a time. Rent, she said, had climbed like stairs with no landing, $1,200, then $1,500, then more, and the cafe job could not keep pace. She knew Ben from the repair shop down the block, where he fixed mixers and old toasters for cash. One cold day, a man with kind eyes had walked into the cafe and asked for tea, then laughed and said he almost paid in pounds because he had once taken a short trip to Europe and the habit stuck in his head. He paid $3, left $2 for the tip, and stayed to talk. That man was Jack. He came back the next week and asked if they would like a drive. He brought them here and opened the same rusty gate I had just opened. A house should hold people, he said to them, the way he used to say to me. A door should open. He came 7 times a year with lists and tools. He showed Ben the wellhead and the breaker box. He set a jar by the door and slid $20 bills into it for light and water and told Grace to do the same when she could. He bought Leo a picture book about horses and read it aloud on the porch, each page slow, each picture named. I listened, and the tight knot in my chest came loose another inch. You have kept it well, I said. It felt like I was talking to Jack through them, and maybe I was. They took me through the rooms. The bunkhouse had a workbench now, neat as a school lesson, with jars of screws and nails lined like soldiers. The barn held our old mare, gray around the eyes but calm, and beside her a new foal who leaned into my hand like a warm question. In the kitchen, on the shelf under the window, I found Jack's ledger. New pages held new lines, eggs to store, $6 a dozen. Repairs for Mr. Hale, $90. Pie order on Sunday, 10 pies, $150. At the bottom of a page he had written, small and proud, it grows. As the sun moved, the rooms settled into their old light. Grace poured tea from the blue kettle and set the cups on the table like we were family. Leo lined up his trucks on the windowsill. Ben checked the porch corner with a level and said he would lift it a ½ inch next week. I stood at the threshold and looked from the house to the field and back. I had not come for 47 years. Jack had come 7 times a year without me. He had not let the place go quiet. He had filled it with steady life. I knew then that this visit would not end with a quick sale and a pen. I did not say so yet. I only sat and sipped the tea and let America's wide sky rest on my shoulders until my breath found an easy pace. The gate was still rusty, but it had opened, and the house, my house, was not empty. I woke before the sun, the way I used to on the ranch, and stood at the kitchen window with my hands around a warm cup. The house breathed with small sounds, the tick of the old wall clock, the soft scrape of the dog's paws on the porch, the kettle settling on the stove. The sky lifted from gray to pale gold. A thin mist lay over the grass, and the windmill turned like a slow, kind hand. I felt Jack close by, not as a sharp ache now, but as a calm weight. I told him, in my head, that I was ready to see everything he had kept alive. When Grace came in, she wore a heavy sweater and carried a basket. "Eggs," she said with a half smile. "The hens did well." Leo padded behind her, hair sticking up, clutching his wooden truck. Ben followed with 2 boards and a level. He nodded toward the porch corner. "We'll lift it today," he said. His voice had the steady note of a man who finishes what he starts. We ate toast with apple jelly and counted the eggs out loud with Leo, who tapped each shell like a small banker. Grace wrote the number down in Jack's ledger, 31, and next to it the price the store in Denver paid, $6 a dozen. The shape of the numbers looked neat and brave. After breakfast, we walked the place together, so I could meet what lived here now. The barn held the mare and the foal, who pressed his warm nose into my palm as if I were a story he wanted to read. We brushed the mare's neck. Ben checked the gate latch with a few quick turns of a wrench. In the old bunkhouse, he showed me a tidy row of jars, screws, nails, washers, each labeled with a penny sticker and a number. It made me think of the city, of office files and copy rooms, but this was better somehow, because the order led to care, and the care led to life. Mid-morning, a truck rolled up the lane. A woman I did not know stepped out with 2 empty pie tins and a paper bag. "Morning, Miss Hart," she said, and introduced herself as Ruth Hale. She lived 5 miles east and kept a small store by the highway, the same store that bought eggs. "Ben replaced my pump," she said, "and Grace's pies keep my shelves sweet." She handed me the paper bag. Inside were 2 fresh loaves and a small envelope with $90 in cash for repairs, counted and sealed. Ruth looked at the porch corner and nodded. "Good bones," she said, and I felt the house stand a little straighter under that praise. When Ruth had gone, we carried in wood, swept the porch, and wiped dust from the picture frames. Grace set a jar by the door and slid in 2 $20 bills for the month's power and water. "Jack always did the same," she said. "He said even a small payment keeps the lights honest." I opened the ledger and wrote today's date. Under it I wrote, with a hand that shook a little, "Porch lifted, 2 boards, $14. Coffee with neighbors. Paid in thanks." The words looked simple and true, the way I wanted my life to be from now on. In the afternoon, the light warmed, and the wind carried the dry, sweet smell of hay. Leo napped on the sofa under a quilt. Ben crouched at the porch corner, the levels bubble bright as a pea. Grace and I shelled beans and talked in short, easy lines. She told me about Chicago, about rent that crept up like a tide and jobs that drifted off like smoke. I told her about my years in that same city and how I learned to count time by train schedules and paydays. We spoke of America as a place that can be hard and kind at once, and of Europe as a word our grandparents said with soft mouths, a far country that had sent us forward with hope. When we fell quiet, it was a good quiet. Near dusk, we took a walk to the far fence. A red fox flashed through the brush. A pair of deer lifted their heads and then slipped away, light as wind. At the fence line stood an old cottonwood, the one where Jack once carved our initials. The cut marks had spread and softened, but you could still read them if you knew the letters, E+J. I pressed my palm there and felt the rough map of our years. "He came here," I said, "more to the tree than to Grace. 7 times a year. He filled the rooms with people. He kept the door open. Grace said, "He said a house is a hand if you open it." When we turned back, the porch stood level. Ben had done it while we walked. The corner lifted a clean half-inch. The dog trotted ahead and took his post at the steps, proud of a job he did not do, but believed in anyway. We ate soup at the pine table and sliced one of Ruth's loaves. Leo woke and blinked at us like a small owl, then reached for his truck and for a slice of bread at once. I slipped $3 into the jar and thought of Jack's old joke about pounds. I could hear his laugh, low and close. That night, in our old room, I opened the window and let the cool air in. The moon washed the floor pale. The house felt full, of breath, of work done well, of plans that seemed possible. I had come to see if there was anything left. What I found living there was more than I had hoped. A family, good neighbors, honest work, and the steady hum of a place that still knew my name. I lay down, and for the first time in a long while, I slept all the way to morning. Morning came with a clean sky and a wind that moved the grass in long waves. I brewed coffee and read Jack's ledger again, tracing the careful lines he had kept through the years. Grace set plates on the pine table, Ben fixed a hinge that squeaked, and Leo sang to his wooden truck in a whisper. The house felt steady. I knew I could not leave the decision to drift any longer. I had to choose what the ranch would be without Jack, and what I would be without the ranch. I stood at the sink and said his name out loud, quiet but sure. "Jack, I'm ready." After breakfast, I called Anna and Paul. They answered from Chicago, voices familiar and worried. I told them I had walked every room, read every page, met every living soul the place now held. "Your father did not let the ranch grow silent," I said. He opened the door and people walked in, and they brought life. There was a pause, then paper sounds, as if my children were trying to find the right page in a book we had all forgotten we owned. Paul said, "Mom, if it works, if it makes sense, we will stand with you." Anna asked about numbers, kind but firm. I told her what we had. Egg money at $6 a dozen. Repair jobs that ran between $40 and $90 most weeks. Pie orders on Sundays that sometimes reached $150. I said I could add up to $200 a month if the ledger fell short. I heard them both breathe out, and the worry in the line eased a little. I hung up and wrote the plan in plain words on a clean sheet. I titled it The Choice, because that is what it was. I wrote that the ranch stays in the family. Grace and Ben can live here as caretakers with rent set at $1 a month, a true amount that keeps the paper right, and our hearts right too. Utilities will be paid from the jar and the ledger. Any gap I will cover, up to $200, no more without a new talk. We will aim for a small fund of $5,000 for the roof and the well by this time next year. Eggs, repairs, and pies will fill that bucket in slow but faithful drops. When I finished, I read the words aloud. They sounded like a bridge I could walk. Grace took the pen first. Her hand shook, then settled. Ben signed in neat, square letters. I signed last, and felt ink settle like a promise. Leo drew a sun at the bottom, bright as a seal. We put the paper in Jack's ledger between fence posts, $78, and kettle, $29, so that the old lines and the new lines could sit shoulder to shoulder. The dog thumped his tail as if he had witnessed a ceremony. Midday, neighbors came. Ruth Hale brought a bag of flour and 2 empty tins, asking if Grace could bake for the store again. A man named Thomas from down the road stopped by with a mower belt that needed fitting and said he could pay $50 on Friday. We stood on the porch and spoke about America's wide fields and America's tricky weather. Ruth told us she had once sailed to Europe with her sister for a week and learned how a new shore can change your eye. I thought about how a familiar shore can do the same when you stay long enough to see it with a new heart. In the afternoon, Ben and I walked to the cottonwood. The initials E+J were soft-edged now, but they still read as ours. I set my fingers in the grooves and felt years slide into place. "I'm not selling," I said, and the wind lifted the leaves like 1,000 small yes. When we came back, Grace had set the blue kettle to sing. She poured tea and slid the jar toward me. I took $3 from my billfold and dropped it in, then added a single $1 coin for the rent, the sound bright as a bell. As evening fell, the house took on its good, low light. I wrote today's lines in the ledger, signed the plan. Rent, $1. Eggs, 31 collected. Repair request, mower belt, $50 when paid. Pie order, 2 tins, $30. The numbers were not grand, but they were true, and truth has a way of growing when you water it with work. We ate supper together, soup, bread from Ruth, a slice of apple pie, and spoke about tomorrow's chores. Ben would fix the screen door. Grace would bake. I would sort the linen closet and call the insurance office in Denver. The list felt like a song with an easy beat. Night gathered. I opened the window in my old room and let the cool air drift in. The windmill ticked. The dog sighed. Leo laughed in his sleep. I lay down and thought of the city and the years I had counted by elevators and clocks. Here I would count by eggs and boards and pages in a ledger. I would count by mornings that begin with work and end with a porch light. I had made my choice. The ranch was not a burden. It was a hand open again. And I, Eleanor Hart, would keep it open in the country I love, under a sky wide enough to hold grief and hope in the same bright breath.